single-pointedness. The Bhagavad Gita says, evenness of mind is yoga. Patanjali says that one balances the evenness of mind on a single focus of stillness. That this focus of stillness can be given out then, projected as we would say, and Patanjali calls this pranama, the breath name delegation of all value. But in China it's a circulation, not a point, and the balance is rather a balance of dynamic. Closer to the Mevlevi dervish than to the Buddha. Alright, midway between India and China is Tibet. And in the beginning, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition had Indian teachers. Atmasambhava, Tilopa, Naropa were all Indians. But because Tibet was really midway between India and China, the first really great purely Tibetan yogi was Milarepa. So he combined the still-pointedness of India with the dynamic of China. And he wrote this kind of language. Manifestation is not something coming into being. If one sees something happen, it is merely clinging. The nature of samsara is the absence of substance. If one sees substance therein, it is merely an illusion. The nature of mind is two in one. If one discriminates or sees opposites, it is one's own attachment and affection. The qualified guru is the lineage possessor. It is folly to create one's own guru. In this quality, Milarepa is exactly midway between Lao Tzu and Buddha. And he would write this on the slopes of Mount Everest in the Song of the Snow Ranges. It seems that earth and sky agreed between a wind which tears the skin was sent. Rivers ran, torrents surged. Black clouds swept in from all directions. Sun and moon were shut in darkness. And 28 constellations fixed, pegged the Milky Way. 8 planets were tied by an iron chain. This whole firmament wrapped in a fog. In that mist, snow fell for 9 days and nights, and then fell further for 18 days and nights. Fell as big bags of wool, fell like birds flying in the sky, fell like whirling swarm of bees. flakes felt small as a spindle wheel, fell as tiny as bean seed, fell like tufts of cotton. This snowfall was beyond all measure. Snow covered the Himalayas and even touched the sky, falling through the bushes, weighing down the trees. The black, dark mountains became white and all lakes frozen. In this great wilderness, I remained in utter sight. So that's the scale of wisdom. Lao Tzu is on the scale. We're returning back, we're sitting quietly. We're weaving the distractions into thin air. And a slight movement of air around the nostrils disperses that fabric of distraction, evens it out. And between breathing in and breathing out, there's a pause, a natural hiatus. Weaving the itching of the nose back into the air, and letting the two nostrils disperse that distractedness. And as we breathe in, breathe out, we can capture in our minds the moment of change, the moment of transformation between breathing in and breathing out. And when we breathe out, there's another moment, another transformation. Right at the point of stopping breathing out and we breathe back in. That point, before we breathe in, and that inner point before we breathe out, make a line, an angle of penetration into our whole respiratory system, into our whole physiological tapestry. The breath, the breathing is the te. The points of transformation out of stillness in the midst of the dynamic is the Tao. Chapter 78 is Trust Faith. Here is how Wing-Tsit Chen translates chapter 78. His words are, "There is nothing softer and weaker than water, and yet there is nothing better for attacking hard and strong things. For this reason, there is no substitute for it. All the world knows that the weak overcomes the strong, and the soft overcomes the hard, but none can practice it. Therefore the sage says, he who suffers disgrace for his country is called the lord of the land. He who takes upon himself the country's misfortunes becomes the king of the empire." Straight words seem to be their opposite. And he footnotes and shows us how similar this is to the Gospel of Matthew, 5th book, the 10th verse. Master Nee, in translating chapter 78, uses this kind of language. Nothing in the world is softer and more yielding than water. But for wearing down the hard and the strong, there is nothing like it. This is an irrefutable truth, that yielding overcomes the strong and softness overcomes the hard is something known by all, but practiced by few. The ancient master said, "He who can suffer humiliation for the sake of his country is qualified to be its real lord. He who can suffer calamities for the sake of his country is qualified to rule the empire." Indeed, the truth seems paradoxical. Hendricks has translated chapter 78 in this way. In the whole world, nothing is softer and weaker than water, and yet for attacking the hard and strong, nothing can beat it, because there is nothing you can use to replace it. That water can defeat the unyielding, but the weak can defeat the strong. There is no one in the whole world who doesn't know it, and yet there is no one who can put it into practice. For this reason, the words of the sage say, to take on yourself the disgrace of the state. This is called being the lord of the altars of earth and grain. To assume responsibility for an ill-omened event in the state, this is called being the king of the world. Correct words seem to say the reverse of what you expect them to say. Now, all three of these have their own learned quality. A Taoist master, a Chinese professor, an American scholar, professor. But Lao Tzu does not say what they say. They are making a guru out of Lao Tzu. Milarepa has advised us not to do this. He also advises us that manifestation does not mean coming into being. But there's an eerie, paradoxical point that when you see something happen, you are being deceived by your own attachment. It is your attachment that makes it seem that something is happening. Just as in the Saturday course, existence begins with action. Existence is not in nature at all. It's an illusion to suppose that that's true. It's the fount of all flaws. Here's how Lao Tzu, in chapter 78, which has the title, Trust Faith. Why trust faith? Because there's nothing there that you can lean on. There is no substance there. Milarepa, somewhat deeper than our gentleman here, schooled in the high Vajrayana based in Nagarjuna, understanding that shunyata, voidness, is what is true initially. Lao Tzu says nature in its Tao is zero-based. High mathematical logic, late 20th century physics understands zero base. Functioning, here's how Lao Tzu then speaks. Heaven, earth, tenderness, weakness, nothing, more so than water. Yet attacking hardness, strongness, one's nothing itself surpasses. Things none herein have this weakness, this conquers. The strong's tender, this conquers the stiff. Heaven, earth, nothing not knows, nothing can practice. Therefore Spirit Gen says, shepherding the country's sin, he is called Millet Altar Master. Shepherding the country's not blessings, he is called Empire's Emperor. True language appears paradoxical. Now we need just a little bit of acquaintance here, because Lao Tzu, after all, is Chinese, ancient Chinese. He writes this around 500 BC. He writes this at the end of a particular aeon in China, the beginning of which was the development of the I Ching, about 1100 BC, which founded the Zhou Dynasty. Lao Tzu lives at a time when the Zhou Dynasty had become weak, but was still in effect, and would still be in effect for several hundred years. In founding the Zhou Dynasty, the Zhou people traced themselves back to a distant mythical ancestor called Prince Millet. Because the founders of the Zhou Dynasty, King Wen and the Duke of Zhou, King Wu, the nephew and the son, they all came from a region in the west of China where raising grain on vast scales was possible, and the basic grain in that archaic period was millet. It was easier to grow in huge quantities. In the interior of China, where the Shang Dynasty, which preceded the Zhou, where the Shang Dynasty was, a lot of the land was not capable of growing grain because it was what is called loess land, yellow dust, a kind of a clay soil which when it dries out, the surface turns to yellow dust. And when the winds come, you have these yellow dust storms, much like the North Texas red dust storms. So there was no vast fields of grain in the Shang Dynasty. So the Shang Dynasty was based upon a powerful clique of military might, symbolized by bronze weapons, bronze ritual utensils, which symbolize the Shang power of forcing its will upon the country. The Zhou Dynasty displaced the Shang, not by its symbol of force, but by its symbol of complete harmony with heaven. Jade was the symbol of the Zhou Dynasty. Jade displaced bronze, it won over bronze. The jade bead, the circle with the hole in the center, the pendant with the hole in the center, was the symbol of the Zhou Dynasty. Because the Zhou understood they came from a region where you could raise enormous quantities of grain. You could feed an enormous population of people. You could take care of an enormous additional population of people. Surplus food was the key to the Zhou taking over China. So in the Book of Songs, the original Chinese collection of poetry celebrating the bright new people of the Zhou, they had realized that intelligence of being in harmony with heaven, knowing how to plant, how to grow, how to raise food in oceans of excess, so that the population of China became agrarian rather than ensconced in this military clique of warlords of the Shang. The symbol of the Zhou was their ancient mythical ancestor, who was called Prince Millet, Fu Qi. Later on, Lao Tzu, because he was so affine to the original Zhou, because the Tao Te Ching is in harmony with the I Ching. When the I Ching quivers, the Tao Te Ching quivers. They're in a consonance. So later on in China, Lao Tzu was mixed up mythically by the population with the ancient Yellow Emperor, some 2,000 years before Lao Tzu, blended together, and it became the kitchen god. Became one of the most popular of all Chinese figures, still popular in China among the peasants, because the people understood that the most powerful thing is to be fed every day. It's much more powerful than having a sharp sword. So, on this millet altar master in chapter 78, Lao Tzu is alluding to awakening the remembrance and the consonance, the remembrance of the Zhou greatness, and their understanding of heaven and earth cycles to produce food by the ocean, and also tying themselves to the ancient mythic founders of the Chinese people. So when he says, shepherding the country's sin, he is called millet altar master. A shepherd is one who takes care of a situation, takes care of the sin. What is the sin? Of thinking you can force something, of thinking you can coerce, like the Shang with their bronze weapons and their bronze ceremonial dishes and bowls and incense burners. The Shang, based on bronze, was an epitome of power that is stiff, unyielding. It's like the samurai feudal masters in the Kurosawa movie. Everything has to be super manly and super stiff, because any slight movement is a weakness and a flaw, and the whole domino effect happens. And all of the strength flakes off into a snowstorm of brittleness. But just as the Bronze Age in Greece came to a sudden end, the Bronze Age in China likewise came to a sudden end. In Greece, it's epitomized in Homer, because the dirty, uncouth iron spear could ram right through the gorgeous shining bronze shield. And some ignorant peasant hoplite with an iron spear could just wade through the beautiful bronze arrogant warriors like a knife through butter. And in the Iliad, the images at the very center of the Iliad, surrounding the death of Patroclus, are all about how the arrogance of the stiff feudal quality is doomed to be displaced. The iron displaces the bronze. Just to be gruesome enough to help you remember an image. Homer has an image of one of these arrogant Greek captains with his bronze helmet. And the sword is thrust from the back, made out of iron, and it goes clear through the helmet and the head. And Homer says, his teeth clamped in the last yell upon the emerging point of the blade. It's an understanding here that the stiff is doomed. And in the 78th chapter, Lao Tzu associates all of the coercive quality of stiffness as a false strength. It's a big front. It can be displaced constantly by a different dynamic. But the most dynamic of all manifestations is not any substance, but the nothing center deeper than substance. So Lao Tzu is not talking about how supple water is as some kind of literary metaphor. That's all right for English majors in their universities. But Lao Tzu is not a subject for English majors in their universities to write nice little critical translations. He's saying something deeper, like Miller. He says, heaven, earth, tenderness, weakness, nothing more so than water, yet attacking hardness, strongness, one's nothing itself surpasses. Things, none herein have this weakness. They don't know they have ain't nothing at the center. We do. Things, none herein have this weakness. This conquers. The strong's tender. This conquers the stiff. So it's a kind of a poetic, semi-poetic misunderstanding to say that the weak conquer the strong. It's deeper. It's more subtle. In fact, it's subtle to the vanishing point. The nothing at the center of all manifestation corresponds to someone's spirit gem, which is purely a corresponding balance with Tao and has no there-ness other than the correspondence with Tao, so that spirit gem at the center has the zero-based Tao. If you could reach into spirit gem, you would not find some jewel at the center, some magical single pointedness at the center. That's an Indian mind that would see it that way. The Chinese Taoist mind does not see it that way. It sees that because the dynamic spins itself around a dimension of focus that has no thusness in itself, the dynamic then, whatever it is, that is existence. So the Tai Chi, that symbol of the Tao, is a symbol of the rotation of wholeness, creating the interchange, the transformation. And it's in the balance of the transformation that's the very center of equanimity in the Tao. So he writes, heaven, earth, nothing not knows. Nothing can practice. Therefore, Spirit Gen says, shepherding the country's sin, he is called Millet Altar Master. Shepherding the country's not blessings, he is called Empire's Emperor. true language appears paradoxical. Now the 79th chapter, in the Ma Wang Tui manuscript found in the tombs just recently, about 15 years ago, 12 years ago. In the Ma Wang Tui manuscripts, the 79th is the last chapter of the Tao Te Ching, not chapter 81. Chapters 80 and 81 in the Ma Wang Tui go in between chapters 66 and 67. So before we come to chapter 79, let's go to chapter 80 and 81, and we're going to now put them in retrospect to insert them between 66 and 67. Now if you recall, or perhaps you don't recall, but you could refresh yourself. You could listen to the tapes. When we talked about 67, which is about the three treasures, and chapter 66, which is called Behind You. So 80 and 81 go in between Behind You and three treasures. 80 is called Alone Standing, and that's 80, and 81, Propounding Essentials. So that 80 and 81 have this kind of, remember it's not a causality, and it's not quite a correspondence, but they occur together so that standing alone, or alone standing, notice the difference here, the emphasis here is on being alone, in the sense of solitude. It's like alone standing in Lao Tzu, in his Chinese, is speaking and saying what we would say that our solitude is forthright. And that quality of having our solitude forthright makes our being alone not loneliness at all, but paradoxically full. And in that established quality, there is a correspondence with the three treasures. And propounding essentials, that is to say, when you're speaking your language, you're propounding, you're talking about meaning. You don't talk about the rim qualities, but propounding essentials, so that one's language is only saying the bare roots of meaning. And it has consonance with behind you. Here is chapter 80, Alone Standing. I guess I'd better give you these translations, at least one of them, so you can see mine is radically different from that. Here's 80 and Wingset Chan, and then I'll give you mine. Let there be a small country with few people. Let there be 10 times and 100 times as many utensils, but let them not be used. Let the people value their lives highly and not migrate far. Even if there are ships and carriages, none will ride in them. Even if there are arrows and weapons, none will display them. Let the people again knot cords and use them in place of writing. Let them relish their food, beautify their clothing, be content with their homes, and delight in their customs. Though neighboring communities overlook one another, and the crowing of cocks and barking of dogs can be heard, yet the people there may grow old and die without ever visiting one another. And this is generally the sense that you will find in most of the translations. including the Chinese scholars. This is not what Lao Tzu says at all. Lao Tzu says, under alone standing, under solitude enduring, small country, few people, let have 10 men, 100 men, gen, its commendator, yet not coerce. Let people esteem death, yet not cringe distantly. Though having ships, carriages, nowhere to ride them. Though having armor, weapons, nowhere to thrust them. Let people return to knotted cords, yet use them. Delight in their food, pride in their clothes, content in their dwellings, rejoice in their nativeness. Neighboring country mutually toured, roosters, dogs, their voices mutually heard. People reach elder age at death, not mutually visited before. Now it's a different quality here. In these other translations, there's a sense of this kind of pastoral quality to the ideal of the Taoist community, that you don't go very far from where you're born. And that the great simplicity is that you just stay put. The Chinese have no pastoral tradition whatsoever in their literature. This is reading a Western literary form with all of its attendant sensitivity, regressively back into, atavistically back into, a culture that did not have that quality at all. The pastoral poem in the West comes from Alexandria, comes from the 3rd century BC, comes from a poet named Theocritus. And 300 years after Theocritus, the pastoral was developed by Virgil. Out of the eclogues into a kind of a poetry which is called the Georgics, ostensibly about the beauties of beekeeping in northern Italy, but really about the quality of human nature when it flows over the military barriers that Roman power had set up, the boxes and lines that Roman military might had set up. Virgil said nature in its beauty overflows the false lines that man's carved. The Georgics are a transformation from the eclogues to the Aeneid. And the Western pastoral tradition is developed from those beginnings and brought into play many times, so that by the 20th century, when these translators read Lao Tzu, they read into him an ancient Alexandrian pastoral tradition. It's rather like the pleasant little Victorian parlor poets trying to talk about the glories of a sunset compared to someone like Shelley writing about Prometheus seeing the sunset from the verge of crag-like agony. Lao Tzu is like Shelley. It is not pastoral at all. And he does not say that it's really sweet and neat to stay at home. He is not one-pointed. He is not bucolic in this kind of sentimental, beautifying the peasant value way. That's one of the world's greatest mystical geniuses. And he's talking about the way in which the dynamic that spins round pure nothing creates an exchange which powers up to transformation. And when the transformation happens mutually, one gets a world without lines. So he begins, small country, few people, let have 10 men, 100 men, Jen is accommodated, yet not coerce. Then he says, repeating the Chinese phrase, let have 10 men, 100 men. Jen, its commentator, yet not coerce. The second phrase is, let people esteem death, yet not cringe distantly. That is to say, death is a part of the life cycle. It's not opposite from death. Death and life are not mutually exclusive polarity. They belong together in the same experience which we have. We would say, in modern 20th century scientific kind of language, that life and death together generate a field of experience. In India, there is no after-death quality. There is rebirth. And continuity is a karma which is picked up again at rebirth. But there's no after-death experience. In China, there is plenty of after-death experience. Veneration of ancestors. Taking care to set bowls of food out so that hungry goats don't bother you. In Tibet, with Milarepa, you find, for the first time, the meeting of this, and in the Tibetan Vajrayana, you find the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The quality of our experience horizon extends through life and through the death experience and beyond. That the three bardos beyond this world's life experience form a continuity with them. Let's stop for just a second. Get me a hatchet. Put yourselves out. Because you can't hear anything if you're not ready to hear it. I once wrote a phrase in a pamphlet about 1970, the real student is prepared to be prepared. So when you come to a situation like this, you should be prepared already. But before you come here, you should prepare yourself for preparation. So about 4 in the afternoon or something, when it's tea time, to start emotionally being aware that you can, if you want to, quiet yourself down. It's an interesting physiological response that the body listens to the mind. If you will speak to your body will listen. It's been established in many ways, and I can testify personally, that even in the midst of the most tremendous, anxious, tidal wave of discomforture physiologically, you can calm it by just thinking the thought of calmness and meaning. So about 4 in the afternoon, just tell your body, it's time to quiet down. And that thought will settle You know, the old Indian master Nagarjuna lived in the late 2nd, early 3rd century. Nagarjuna was one of the most sophisticated of all philosophers, all gurus. He was about 100 years old, and he still had not found the right disciple, the right person to pass his lineage on. And so he had an attendant who would greet all of the would-be people who came to study under Nagarjuna by taking a pitcher of cold water and a glass and presenting them to the person coming in, and then the attendant would report to Nagarjuna what had transpired. In other words, sometimes somebody as masterful as Nagarjuna or Lao Tzu or Milarepa will find out what is true about you in the smallest possible way. How did you respond in a hot climate to a pitcher of cold water and an empty glass? One day, a fairly mature man, about 35, named Arya Deva, came to study under Nagarjuna, and the disciple came out with a pitcher of cold water and the empty glass. And Arya Deva, being a very good Buddhist, had only his robe, which was usually made of patches of fabric every spring. They would take thrown away fabric and they would sew them together so that the traditional Buddhist robe was a patchwork, quilt-like robe. When you see the Buddhists all in their beautiful black robes and their golden orange robes and their saffron robes and their red robes, they're all not Buddhists at all. So the only thing that a traditional Buddhist carried was a needle and his begging bowl and one pair of sandals. That's all you were allowed. That's it. So when Aryadeva was greeted by the pitcher of cold water and the empty glass, he took the needle out of his robe and he dropped it into the water, and it went down to the bottom of the pitcher. And the attendant, not understanding it all, went to Nagarjuna and told him and showed him what happened. And Nagarjuna said, "That's it. Bring him in. That's the next successor." Because it was a very deep symbolic way. Aryadeva was telling him, I am here seriously. I'm not going to ever leave here without you giving my needle back to me because I earned it again. I will either not be a Buddhist or be dead if I do not learn within this year. The intensity of commitment that I now will learn it all for real. All with waiting any longer. That quality of dedication is the only requirement. It's like as soon as you have that thought that I now will really do it. In Pali, it's called bodhicitta. It's the thought of enlightenment. And once that thought is there, it's like the thought of calming the body. The thought of enlightenment calms the psyche. It may take a while. It may take a couple of weeks. It might even take you a couple of months. But the thought that now it's irrevocable. I'm going to do it now, whatever it takes. That settles the dust of the psyche. That thought, meaning it. And all of the consonance in the universe comes to help you with that endeavor. Because the actual fact is there are so many enlightened spirits in the universe. It's jam-packed. And there are so few people that really make any commitment at all, that there are about 20 jillion helpers for each person who really commits themselves. And so you have all the helpers you could possibly use. If life and death are in their ecology, the equanimity of life and death overflows their apparent polarity. The apparent polarity are the kinds of lines that Roman empires draw conceptually in life. They're the kinds of lines that the Shang Dynasty drew in life. The Tao of nature overflows those lines as if they didn't exist because they don't. So that all of the complications that are there in your life, the Tao by osmosis can come completely, perfectly, instantly through all of that unaffected. It's like the most phantom of all neutrino cosmic rays. The Tao is right there, instantaneously when you are. And you have all the amperage that exists at your participatory activity level. So chapter 80, alone standing, reads, small country, few people, let have 10 men, 100 men, gen its commendator, yet not coerce. Let people esteem death, yet not cringe distantly. In other words, don't fear death ahead of time. Don't cringe ahead of time. God, I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get injured. This could be a mess. Don't cringe beforehand. Don't cringe distantly. If something happens, it happens. But don't preempt it by fear before it happens. Though having ships, carriages, nowhere to ride them. A quality of Tao where you don't need to be conveyed by things. Though having armor, weapons, nowhere to thrust them. There are no enemies. In the Tao, there are no enemies. Let people return to knotted cords, yet use them. Knotted cords were a way of keeping track of numbers. Knotted cords originally were the way in which numeracy was practiced. Before literacy, there's numeracy. Before letters, there's numbers. Before language becomes written, the calculation of number was done by knotted cords. So the abacus is a kind of a matrix for knotted cords. So Lao Tzu says, let us return back before language to understanding the roots of language, which is numeracy. Yet use them. Delight in their food, pride in their clothes, content in their dwellings, rejoice in their nativeness. Neighboring country mutually toured, roosters, dogs, their voices mutually heard. People reach elder age at death, not mutually visiting before. And then 81, Propounding Essentials. Here's how Master Ni translates it, which in our received text has always been the traditional end of the Tao Te Ching. he translates it, true words are not necessarily beautiful. Beautiful words are not necessarily true. That which is good does not argue. That which argues is not good. One who knows deeply may not have broad learning. One who has broad learning may not know deeply. One of absolute virtue is not preoccupied with amassing material wealth. Yet the more he lives for others, the richer is his life. The more he gives, the more he abounds. The absolute nature of the universe is to benefit, not harm. The nature of an absolute being is to extend virtue to the world unconditionally and to contend with no one. So that traditionally the Tao Te Ching ended there. Here's Hendrick's translation of chapter 81. Sincere words are not showy. Showy words are not sincere. Those who know are not widely learned. Those widely learned do not know. The good do not have a lot. Those with a lot are not good. The sage accumulates nothing. Having used what he had for others, he has even more. Having given what he had to others, what he has is even greater. Therefore, the way of heaven is to benefit and not cause any harm. The way of man is to act on behalf of others and not to compete with them. Now this phrase, the sage accumulates nothing, gets stuffed back into the pastoral flock. Well, the sage doesn't have anything. He doesn't accumulate anything. He's propertylessness. He would be like the French anarchist Proudhon, who said property is theft. If you have anything, you took it from someone. This is not in the Tao Te Ching. There's no pastoral romance quality. Lao Tzu, when he says the sage accumulates nothing, and he doesn't say that, but it means that the circumambulation of the whole pivots around the zero-based Tao, and it radiantly amplifies. So that the zero-based Tao would, quote, accumulate, except Tao doesn't accumulate. Here's how Lao Tzu, if he were using the English language, this is how he would speak in chapter 81. And notice now that it goes between chapter 80 and chapter 67, which is 3 treasures. The title of the chapter, Propounding Essentials. I've taken the old D.T. Suzuki translation of that chapter title because it's very, I think it's right. Propounding Essentials. Talking about the basic structures. What are the basic structures? What is not in substance, but occurs because the dynamic is seamless. The center is not there because the substance makes a center. The center is a focus because the ecology of movement is all of one piece. When movement is all of one piece, the focus that is no substance occurs naturally. It's like people that take Tai Chi Chuan and they have to learn exact movements and all this. This is garbage. Even Chuang-Tzu, 2,300 years ago, made fun and ridiculed people who mimic birds and animals to try and have the Tao. That's not it at all. The Tai Chi is when all of your movements and a life fullness are seamless. There's no jointedness at all in whatever it is that you're doing. If you're exerting your movements to conform to 108 standard rules, and you're trying to carry what comes out of that into your life, You get a quasi-military mind. You get the kinesthetics of a Nazi brown shirt. You become an authoritarian patsy for the dictator who has the power because he's the boss. He understands Tao. Somebody that is living in Tao is not throwing authoritarian rules out anywhere, much less to those who have come to him to share life. There are a lot of gym teachers parading as sages right here in Los Angeles. Here's what Lao-Tzu says. Faith language, not pleasant. Pleasant language, not faithful. Good ones, not dispute. Disputatious ones, not good. Knowing ones, not learned. Learned ones, not know. Spirit gen, not stores, having thereby busy gen itself exceedingly excesses. Having thereby given gen itself exceedingly plentiful. Heaven itself's Tao works, yet no injuries. Spirit gen itself's Tao busy, yet no dissension. Now that's quite different from the kinds of translations that one finds. Let's try Lancet Chan's translation, then come back to mine. I'm using the top of the line. These are the best translations that have been available. True words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not true. A good man does not argue. He who argues is not a good man. A wise man has no extensive knowledge. He who has extensive knowledge is not a wise man. The sage does not accumulate for himself. The more he uses for others, the more he has himself. The more he gives to others, the more he possesses of his own. The way of heaven is to benefit others and not to injure. The way of the sage is to act but not compete. Faith language, not pleasant. Pleasant language, not faithful. Good ones, not dispute. Disputatious ones, not good. Knowing ones, not learned. Learned ones, not know. Spirit gen, not stores, having thereby busy gen itself exceedingly excesses. Having thereby given gen itself exceedingly plentiful. Heaven itself's Tao works, yet no injuries. Spirit gen itself's Tao busy, yet no dissension. There's a whole different emphasis. Lao-Tzu is talking about the purity of the dynamic of continuing to do in correspondent sync with the Tao, so that when your gen becomes holy, your spirit gen, in correspondence with Tao, whatever it is that you do will make a correspondence in this world. You don't have to be gingerly suspicious about doing something because you're going to contaminate yourself by action. That's not what the Tao Te Ching is about. That's not what the Bhagavad Gita is about. This whole thing of being afraid to live, of being quiescence out of fear of contamination, is, as the Yiddish word suggests, dread. It's just not, that's not it at all. The Bhagavad Gita counsels Arjuna to get in there. The Tao Te Ching counsels us to continue to do, but don't get caught up in the fruits of action. Don't get caught up in projecting out what you think should happen. bring yourself into correspondence with Tao. Let the dynamic, in its seamless full circulation, create its own focus. That focus will be in correspondence with the Tao, and out of that tuning fork, whatever you do will produce a correspondence in the world. Nature will be right there. So, 79 then, the end of the Tao Te Ching, the real end of the Tao Te Ching, its title is Sustain Agreements. Now most translations think that this has to do with business. To make peace where there has been great resentment, there is bound to be resentment left over. How could this be regarded as good? Therefore the sage holds the right tally, yet makes no demands of others. For this reason, those who have virtue are in charge of the tally. Those without virtue are in charge of the taxes. The way of heaven has no favorites. It's always with the good man. All right, now if you tell somebody that deep, deep wisdom, the deepest wisdom in all Chinese civilization can be summed up, the way of heaven has no favorites, it's always with the good man. It sounds like a part of the script for Yoda that George Lucas threw away. It's a sophomoric nothing. It's sponge cake philosophy. That's nothing. The way of heaven has no favorites. It's always with the good man. We're talking about the ending of the discussion on Te. What is Te? Te is the seamless oneness that occurs because Tao is zero-based. And because Tao is zero-based, it allows Te to be completely and utterly what it is without any interference whatsoever. So that Te, oneness, seamlessness, really comes into play. But we don't come into play because we imitate Te. We come into play because we correspond with Tao. If we imitate Te, then we're trying to do what Te corresponds with. Te corresponds with the mind. Corresponds with the symbol-making mind. Corresponds with what language does. Generating meaning, structures, and so forth. So we try to tell somebody what we want to say, what we want them to learn, and that's the whole basis of propaganda. Propaganda is not wisdom. Propaganda is not Tao. A politics built on propaganda produces chaos. Because the 5-phase energy cycle should, at the 5th phase, flow back into the zero-based Tao. If Jen tries to imitate Te by being powerful, then you get an ego. And so somebody in the Vajrayana once said the ego is like a tempest in the teapot. The ego is like this little tiny self-centered hurricane of need in the midst of a universe of plenty. The ego tries to be imitating like Te, tries to be force, tries to be power. Oh, I'm powerful. What I say goes. It's like Edward G. Robinson playing Little Caesar. Yeah, you're going to do what I tell you, or we're going to shoot you up. That kind of egotistical power mirrors, parallels, steals the place of Te, except that we are not Te. So that instead of Te and mind being without any compartments, being oneness, Because the ego tries to steal the power of Te, the mind then becomes compartmentalized. And what the mind makes of the world, then the world becomes compartmentalized. And the world divided into the lines of the Romans and the partitions of the Shang becomes a warren of prison cells for human beings instead of a natural scape in which life can occur. So more and more, instead of the world able to flow back into the Tao, the world resembles a jungle of prison cells of intention, of all the people trying to force their way. It becomes a cacophony of phony plans. And instead of having a landscape, people carry around maps of propriety in their mind and say, I own this and I want that. You own this, but I own this. Here are these lines, here you can do this, but you can't do that. This is mine and this is yours. And instead of the 10,000 things flowing back into the Tao, the 10,000 things try to get out of that condition and try to jump to a sixth phase which does not occur. And that's where the chaos comes in. That's where the nightmare is. That's where the confusion is. It's like somebody who is so jittery they're trying to jump out of their skin. You can't jump out of your skin. So they get up and they walk around trying to get into some other place where they are not filled with anxiety. Or they see somebody who's calm, so they try to get close to them so they're not going to be in that anxiety, but they carry it with them. Because they're generating it all the time. Why? Because they have misplaced Te. It's just like in a film, where the film is running through the gate, and the film gets stuck sometimes in the gate, and it jumps and shudders, and you see the image on the screen. That's the chaos that's created by a stuck gate. Instead of Jen processing the flow so that the image base just flows, it gets stuck in the ego and produces this confusion, this cacophony, which never flows back into Tao, and so everything becomes like a backed up swamp. And the whole flow of energy becomes tepid, and finally insipid, and finally pestilential. And one says, well, I got to add something to this mixture like Drano to get some flow going, and you just make it poisonous. Well, the whole thing comes down to where Jen, not usurping Te. So 79, Lao Tzu talks this way. Balancing great wrath surely will waffle wrath. I'm using waffle here. It's sort of British, English, adapted very successfully by Canadians. What is a waffle? A waffle is like part ridges and part squares sunk in. A waffle is a 50-50 distribution of the dough. It's a British-Canadian way of saying neither this nor that. A kind of a limbo. You have mechanically distributed things into a polarity, but it's not really working. So when something waffles, you're not quite sure if it's working or not. Balancing great wrath. When you're in this condition, Te has not just power, Te is all the power that there is, but seamless. It has no compartments, so that it is one. It doesn't mean that it's an absolute. Master Ni uses the wrong English here. Pardon me. He puts in often absolute. This is not it. God is more pure than the monad. That's the high Western tradition. But the oneness, the monad, has efficacy because it is seamless oneness. Balancing great wrath surely will waffle wrath, whereby make good. How can you deal with that? If you just mechanically distribute into a supposed pattern great wrath, you still have the wrath. It's like people who learn to control their anger, they still have all that anger. Well, they do a wonderful job of controlling that anger. They are filled with anger. The wisdom is not to generate the anger in the first place. Then you don't need all the neurotic strategies to balance it out. There's a beautiful little film with Bill Murray called What About Bob? Where he's completely neurotic. It's a modern, urban Westerner, and he can't do anything at all because he's afraid of everything. And he discovers a psychiatrist who has written a book called Baby Steps. And you can do anything if you just do it baby step by baby step and just keeping track of the step that you are now doing. It's like mindfulness. It's like Vipassana meditation, only put into a Hollywood movie thing. If you do keep track of just this step now, you can take that step. You can always take a baby step. And you can do anything. But you can accumulate a kind of a confidence that there are no barriers. If you can take baby steps indefinitely anywhere, then eventually you will come to understand that there are no real barriers. The barriers are only apparent. The partitions are only illusion. And the continued corralling yourself because they're there is a delusion. They're only there if you think they're there. If you realize that they are not there, they are not there. And when you begin to relax in your own mind, so that when you move dynamically as a livingness with no barriers whatsoever, then you embody Te, but in a way so that the Te is like this fulcrum where the Tao and your Gen are correspondent. So balancing great wrath, trying to make it work, trying to balance it, surely will waffle wrath, whereby make good. Therefore Spirit Gen holds the left side agreement, yet not exacts from others. What's the left side? It's like the balance. What's the right side? The Tao. Spirit Gen is concerned with holding its correspondence with Tao. Doesn't worry about the Tao. You don't have to worry, well, geez, am I matching up to the Tao? That's not it at all. You occur in your thusness, keeping the dynamic of your life going, but being quiet within the dynamic of your life. And that's like the left side of this correspondent agreement. The whole chapter title is Sustain Agreement. Therefore, Spirit Gen holds the left side agreement, yet not exacts from others. Having Te keeps agreements. No Te insists claims. Heaven's Tao, no preference, always helps good Gen. So if one's inner presence, if one's spirit Jen holds this left side agreement, where the Tao is the right side and will be there. If you do your part, that will be there. It's a promise. So, though Spirit Gen holds the left side agreement, yet not exacts from others. Don't expect others to fill in and balance you out, or fill in your deficiencies. You have no deficiencies. Whoever it is that you really are, you are totally complete as you are. Because when you focus that, there will be a presence right there, which is distinctly you. And that distinctly you, Spirit, Jen, is in corresponding harmony with Tao. You don't have to make it happen. It's like discovering that that is so. Yet not exacts from others. Having Te keeps agreements. No Te insists on claims. Te is not about insisting on any claim. You don't have any claim on anything, including yourself, including your own mind. You cannot demand of your life that it produce this. Well, you can, but it's rather petulant. And we're all petulant. I'm as petulant as anyone. But the quality can be seen through, and the wisdom tradition is to be able to see through that. Even though you may do it, you still, if you can see through it, you can let it go. Heaven's Tao, no preference. Because the Tao, it turns out, doesn't have a right side. It isn't the right side agreement. It has no preference. So if we keep just our spirit Jen, keeping our left side of the agreement with Tao, we will discover that the Tao has no left or right side, and we have no left or right side. Heaven's Tao, no preference. Always helps good Jen. Always corresponds with this Jen that is itself.